I don't know if you saw much of the political parties. They got together, they talked, their conferences or whatever it's called. And there's a lot of bashing from both sides. My side is right, or this side is absolutely wrong, and vice versa. What do you think would happen, would you suppose, should both parties meet in one house because somebody invited them? Do you think there would be a little bit of dissension between them? Do you think there would be a lot of dissension between them? Well, as it was, it's actually nothing new to have two people groups within one country constantly at war with each other. In Israel, Jesus had two groups of people constantly fighting against each other. Tax collectors, publicans, Gentiles, Pharisees, Jews, and those who were of the true lineage of Abraham. Two parties vying for power within one country. And boy, did they hate each other. So turn with me to Luke 15. So the context of the situation is this. You could go to verse 11. The context is this. Jesus is having a big party at his place. Were there balloons? I don't know. But if it's a party, there should be balloons. And while he's eating with the sinners and publicans, the Pharisees begin to get upset. Because how can somebody holy deal with somebody so unholy? And what I mean in this regards is essentially the tax collectors, who were Jews, had been ostracized from their own people. They had been viewed essentially as Gentiles because of the work that they had done. Because their work was in direct relations to the Roman government, which was pagan. It was corrupt. It was power-hungry. It was murderous. It was villainous. Those were your tax collectors. They represented that. Not only that, but the tax collectors would take leave of they would abuse their power. Supposing you can't pay. Well, you must pay tonight. But I can't pay. I don't have the money. Well, very well. What of your daughter, who happens to be a virgin? Let her come with me for the night, and I'll call your debts none. They would also increase the taxes without informing the governor how much they were actually collecting in. So the governor wants $5. Very well. I shall charge my neighbor $7 and keep 2 for myself. So they were very wealthy. They were very worldly. But they were looked down upon. They were not allowed a place within the temple. In fact, their place in the temple was outside with the rest of the Gentiles, even though they were Jew by birth. So essentially, they are kicked out of Israel. In fact, those true, devout believers of Yahweh, those who were of the fold and not affiliated with them, consider them children of the devil. So to have Christ, who identifies as the Son of God, sitting with children of the devil, how does that work? So the Pharisees are upset. But the tax collectors are upset at the Pharisees as well. Because they look at them as abusing their power, abusing their position. They see them as allowing people to manipulate their inheritances so as not to provide for their parents. They look at the Pharisees with disgust because he can stand above the rest and pray, Father, thank you for not making me as sinful as this man over there. The Pharisees could pray that. They were righteous. And so there's this dissension. And Jesus sees that. And so he's like, you know what? I'm going to tell you some parables. 3 to be precise. The first parable he tells is of the shepherd with 100 sheep. But one leaves outside of the fold. And so the shepherd, being good and caring for him, he leaves the 100 and goes and finds the lost one. The second parable is about a maiden who's betrothed to be married. And she has about her a necklace of 10 pieces of silver. But she loses one in her house. And she goes looking for it. She cleans the place. She lights the place. As reading it, I thought to myself when I was looking for my car keys last week, I couldn't find them, and so boy, did I clean my apartment. I cleaned it good. And this is what she's doing. She's looking within her house to find it. The first parable is geared specifically towards the publicans and the tax collectors and the sinners, because they were of the fold of God, but now they're outside of it. And Christ is saying, I am coming to you, and I will bring you back into my fold. And so the publicans identify, they're like, I am outside of the temple. I'm outside of the promises, the covenants. but God's coming to bring me back in. The second one was in regards to the Pharisees. Because he's saying, though you are within my house, though you are within my covenant, though you enjoy my blessings, you're lost. You're not where you should be about my neck. And so the Pharisees wonder, maybe I'm lost in the house of God. Maybe I need to be found. But apparently his audience didn't get it, because Jesus has to give them a third parable, which is perhaps the most famous parable of all, the parable of the prodigal son. Now what's interesting is I was going over commentators. I love the way how they would all fight amongst themselves. The one commentator said this is the parable of the prodigal son. Being a Western commentator, we identify with it because we're Gentiles and we're brought back in. A more Middle Eastern commentator said, no. This is a parable of the lost sons, because there's actually two commentators, or there are two sons and it's about them. The third one, though, I read an African commentator, and he said, you're all wrong. It should be called the parable of the forgiving father, because the two sons only reveal the father's goodness and his forgiveness. So I'm going to break this proverb into two studies. Today we're going to focus primarily on the prodigal son. Next week, though, we're going to focus on the lost son, the oldest son, which I actually think the parable is actually about the lost son. That's my opinion. That is the oldest son. He's the one that Jesus is really trying to get a hold of. But let's not neglect the younger. Let's dive into it. Verse 11. It says, so Jesus is speaking, a certain man had two sons. So obviously, two parties, two sons. The younger of them said to his father, well, Father, give me the portion of goods that fall to me. So he divided to them his livelihood. Now what's interesting about this is when the oldest son reaches a certain age, he assumes command of the father's livelihood, of the father's land, his owning. And essentially the father takes a more, I don't want to use the word retired stance, but essentially that is what he is. He moves down from authority. He is the chieftain of the clan per se. But it's now the oldest son is in charge of everything. The oldest son does the finances. He does the running of the estate. He owns it. It's his possession. The younger children had to wait until the father died that they could receive an inheritance. And so the younger son is essentially being a 21st century young man. Father, I don't want to work under my oldest brother. I want to go off on my own. I want to be my master. But here's the thing. You're not dying anytime soon. And until you die, I'm stuck here. Would you give me what's due to me now that I can go and make my own way of living? So the father divides the land to the children. Now what's interesting is the oldest son would receive 2/3 of the inheritance, and the younger son would receive only 1/3. The oldest son always received a double portion because his responsibility was still the parents, was still the mother and such, and his sisters. But after the father died, the oldest son would be the one to distribute the land, to distribute the finances. So what a lot of older sons did, as was the case, was, this is a fertile land. I'll take this. This has got a lot of rocks, but younger brother, you need to build character, so I'll give it to you. So the younger son didn't want to be robbed. He didn't want to be bullied. He didn't want to be pushed around. He simply said, I want, Father, what you give me. Not what my oldest brother is going to give me, but what will you give me? I'll take. And so he divides it to them. Continue to verse 13. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and journeyed to a far country. Now, I can't imagine the type of bitterness that would have been between the two brothers. Because here the oldest brother just saw his inheritance, just saw his possession prematurely divvied up. And he didn't have a say in the matter. Now, the youngest son, because of the word inheritance, it implies a monetary value. Most inheritances were giving out land-wise, but the son is asking, I want it in money because I'm leaving. So he leaves. He goes to a far country. Immediately, the publicans and the sinners are identifying with the younger son. Because even though they live in Israel, they are yet themselves foreigners. and feel like strangers in a land unknown to them. It's their own people, but yet they're still foreigners. So what does he do there? He wastes his possessions with prodigal living. A very scary sight to see is a homeschooler set loose on a college campus. Coming from a very sheltered way of living, as soon as they realize what all is out there as far as movies, music, entertainment, food, they let themselves go. I saw a homeschooler in my secular college, in St. Clair Community College. He astounded the sinners by how much he reveled in worldliness. You're given a chance to fly, you fly wherever the wind takes you. But also, the son is trying to find a new identity. He'd always lived under the identity of his father, of his brother. But now he's making his own identity. And he wants to fit in with this faraway land. What are your customs? Well, every Friday night, we go out to the bar to drink. Well, every Friday night, I'm going to go out to the bar and drink. Oh, that's great. Well, what do you do on Tuesday nights? Well, on Tuesday nights, we go to the bowling alley. Okay, well, I'm going to the bowling alley. He's trying to fit in. He's trying to be a part of them. He doesn't want to be the foreigner, the outsider. He's trying. And here the tax collectors see it. They see themselves. I'm trying to fit in with the Romans. I'm eating what the Romans eat. I do what the Romans do. But I'm wasting it. I can feel myself shriveling up. But I've got to fit in because my brothers won't take me back. My people look down upon me, so I've got to fit in. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. That's what the publicans were doing. But when he had spent all, there arose a severe famine in that land, and he began to be in want. Isn't it interesting that the famine comes after he spent all his money, after his wealth is gone? Not before, because had the famine come, the son probably would have had some common sense to keep some of it in. But that's not the case here. It's all gone. Having happened, he joins himself to a citizen of that country, and is set into the fields to feed the swine. Oh, how the publicans must have identified, like, yes. Because the Gentiles were considered swine. They were unclean. You weren't to touch them. To touch something unclean, you had to cleanse yourself. But the tax collectors had to go out to the Gentiles. They had to go into the garrison buildings. They had to go to the governor's palace. They had to touch the people. They had to touch the money. They were unclean constantly. And here the Pharisees are probably seeing the identification, like, yes. You were foolish in taking your wealth and going off to the Gentiles, because now you're stuck feeding the swine. You're stuck unclean now. There's no hope. Verse 16, and he would gladly have filled his stomach with the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. Isn't that the lure of sin, though? That you just want to be satisfied. I just want to have security. I just want to be filled. I just want to be happy. But none of it satisfies it. He's dealing with the Gentiles, but none of them satisfy him. He's still hungry. He's hungry for more. But what is he hungry for? Verse 17, but when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? He sees that all of this land has to offer is hunger. But yet my father, my servants always have had enough bread. Growing up, when times were tight, the servants still had bread to eat. I wonder, if I go back to my father, would he sustain me? So he says in 18, I will go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. The son has come to a point where he realized that there is no redemption left for him. There is no forgiveness. Because the shame that he's done to his father. In small communities, as you probably know, word spreads fast. If brush fires spread fast, rumors spread faster. And he must be thinking now, I wonder what my father had to think. that when now he goes to the general store, people look at him like he's the one whose son left him, who wished he was dead. When the father went to get a haircut, all of a sudden the barber hesitates because he's the one whose son ran off. Or perhaps he went to the synagogue to hear the word of the Lord, and the people within the church looked at him and said, wow, he doesn't have his family together. Rumors have it his son is actually feeding the swine. That type of resentment causes bitterness in people. The son's only hope is to be a slave. If I can at least be a slave, I'll live. He's not looking for relationship at this point. He's looking for salvation. He's looking to live. Verse 20, and he arose and went to his father. I wonder what the publicans are thinking at this moment. They probably saw their sentence. They feel themselves condemned. How could the father take that son back in? I've gone to the Pharisees to be brought back in, but they reject me. I try to pray to God, but he expects holiness. The Pharisees are probably thinking to themselves, the father might make a slave out of him, but it would be more justice to cast him off. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. Immediately, the tax collectors are aghast. They're not expecting this. The son hasn't even apologized. But the father has already welcomed him back. The son tells him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and yourself. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father says, bring out the best robe. Put it on him, and put my ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. I can't imagine what the Pharisees must have been thinking. You can't do that. You can't bring him back into the sonship. He's gone. He's gone too far astray. He's brought shame on us. I don't think the Pharisees are thinking about the Father. I think they're thinking about themselves. Are you bringing that brother back into my life? Are you bringing that prodigal son back? Are you accepting sinners now? But oh, how joyful that those sinners must have been to hear that. Are you really going to bring me back? And they brought the fatted calf there and killed it. Oh, sorry, the father continues saying, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to be merry. A celebration. The son came back looking to be a servant, expecting to be a slave. But the father says, no, that's not good enough for you. You are my son, and my son you shall be. In Matthew 5, we see a remarkable journey of the prodigal son. Matthew 5:3, blessed are the poor in spirit. The son experienced poverty like he had never experienced it before. He was poor, and I mean dirt poor. And because of how poor he was, it drives him to his father. Blessed are those who mourn. Don't you think the prodigal son was mourning while feeding the swine? Or thinking, I'm unclean. Why have I come here? Blessed are the meek. The prodigal son says this, I'm going to humble myself. I'm going to go to my father and I'm going to beg, just beg the least amount. The least the father could do, aside from kill me, is to make me a servant. Blessed are those that hunger and thirst for righteousness. Isn't it the hunger that brings the son to the fold? That he says, my father's servants have enough to eat. If only they would give me a little bread. Blessed are the merciful. The son goes not off with a rebellious attitude, boasting, I am your son. But rather he comes with a plea. I will accept the lowest estate. Blessed are the pure in heart. I'm convinced the son's heart is pure on this because he just wants to see his father. He wants to be in his presence. Blessed are the peacemakers. The Son desires restored relations. He doesn't see how it can be done, but he hopes for a restored relation. Blessed are those who are persecuted. He knows, being a servant, the rest of his life, he's going to have fingers pointed at him. You were a son, weren't you, once? Yes. Well, what are you doing here? Well, I'm a slave. Why are you a slave? Because I wasted my father as well. That's persecution. But this is what the son wasn't expecting. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The father, because of the law of the land, you can't sell property per se, but rather you rent it away. And so what happens is, because the son sold his possessions, he essentially rented it. And because of the custom of the land, the only person who could buy that land back is somebody who owns the land. So the father is in right position to actually buy back the son's inheritance. You come to me because you're poor, but I'm going to make you rich again. Those who mourn, did the son expect to be comforted? To have his father embrace himself? He came mourning, but he found comfort. He came meek, but blessed are those who are meek, for they shall inherit the earth. His inheritance is brought back. He's a child again. He lives now with the Father. And what about those who hunger and thirst? Don't you think his hunger was satisfied now? Being brought back, he's given a feast. You came for bread. I'm giving you a feast. And he came seeking mercy, and he obtained mercy. He came seeking God, his Father, and he saw him at last. He came to make peace, and peace was offered to him. And as for the persecution, I think he understood that he's actually going to share that persecution with his Father. Because the Father no less had to suffer those sneers and stares from other people. But because he knows he's a son, he will say, I will bear this reputation with me. Because this reputation has now become something that I can take joy in. When people say, hey, weren't you the prodigal son? Yes, I was, but now I'm a complete son because my father brought me back. So the son was lost, but he was found. I can't imagine what the publicans and tax collectors must have been feeling. Can I really be brought back to the fold of God? Will I really be restored to the line of Abraham? Will those blessings from the covenant really be mine again? But don't I have to serve you? Don't I have to apologize? The Father went to the Son before the Son could apologize, so that way the Son could not apologize first. Because if the Son apologized first, I'm sorry to say there would be a moment of pride in his life. I came and apologized to my Father, and he accepted my apology. But instead, when people come and say, how did you apologize? He said, I couldn't even apologize. My Father already brought me back. It was nothing I said. It was nothing I did. It was all my Father taking me back. So, dearly beloved, do we feel far from God today? This week? How far have we strayed? How much are we trying to fit in with those around us, but we're not satisfied? Isn't it a comfort knowing that our Father is already ready to bring us back? I can't imagine. I would honestly love to see, maybe I'm digressing too far, but I would love to see Jesus in a room full of the chief delegates of the Democratic and the Republican Party. I tell them this story. Some of you may be more righteous than others, and some of you may be too far gone, but you're not too far gone. Now next week, we'll get into the Pharisee, the one who had it right, the coin that was lost in his own house. Let's thank our Father today. Oh, Father God, we thank you so much. We thank you so much that you embrace us, regardless of how far we've gone, regardless of what we did with our talents that you blessed us with, that before we knew you, we used them for our own ends. We bankrupted ourselves, just abusing our gifts. But yet you bring us back. You redeem us. And you make us heirs with Christ, joint heirs with Christ. It's too good for us, Father. It's far too good for us. But we come. We come to you. Amen.